Okay, so it's 12 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll stop sharing this. Um, so we're kind of still having people filter in. Hopefully, we'll have a candidate or two kind of filter in. Um, and this is the CPP study break where we answer all questions about CPP. So even if we don't have candidates come in, we can answer questions about liaison stuff too. Um, So today, one of our ideas was to talk about the CPP image reviews that are coming up, the technical image submissions. And Chuck was going to run us through the checklist and kind of the what we know about the CPP technical images. We have some images we can take a look at and kind of review why they did not pass, and they are mine. I will be upfront about that. So just let you know, it doesn't always happen the first time through. So I will turn it over here to Chuck, and we'll kind of wait for. Hopefully, we'll wait for some candidates to come through, but
Yeah.
we'll open it up to questions. We can do that.
Okay, just for overall thing, everybody knows Sherman is annoying wooden doll that nobody likes.
Yeah,
Questions? All right, that's it for this week.
there you go. It's right. Yeah, we all kind of love that dude, right?
Yeah,
I have a question while you're waiting.
sure.
For the image evaluation, one thing that I'm struggling with is getting the shadows within the proper range. I've got just a very small area that is below uh, I think the range was 5 to 30, and it's just a small area that's below it. Um, is it the overall shadows, or will even a few pixels that are below it disqualify you?
Yeah, it's the overall shadows because you are allowed to have minimal clipping and blocking. And if you have a few spots, a few pixels that go under, you're looking at minimal clipping there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd
Thanks.
say, Rick, one thing to look for is if you get, say, if they're blue dots because you've assigned them blue, if they're clipped, if they join up into something recognizable, that's not good. And if they're just random dots, that's much better. So it actually doesn't say blocking. I don't think I've seen the word blocking, but clipping means that you can have values that are below 5. But if they start to join up into something that's a recognizable object, then you haven't got all of the information of that object in the image. That's separate to noise, which is random up and down above those threshold values.
Okay.
Is your clipping recognized? Do the dots going up into an object?
I would say they are recognizable. Specifically where it is, it's in the area that's underneath the clip of the Sharpie. So it's the shadow area underneath the cap itself is fine. It's just that shadow area underneath the clip.
Yeah, and there's a couple different ways you can get around. One, if you have dots, it's not even if they're under that clip. Mine had quite a few of them, a lot. If it changes from dots into a solid line, it's probably too much. But if you could see dots there, like I said, mine had quite a few dots on it. And we have found ways that you can eliminate that completely, which we'll discuss during this.
Okay.
Actually, we'll see if you can guess.
Well, I've tried with a reflector, but because it's such a small area.
Yeah, it's actually it was a couple other candidates who pointed it out to me, and I kind of went, why did I never think of that? It was actually a simple solution. Okay, do we want to wait for anybody else before we get started, or?
I would say go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Though I'd like to add something into that, just that previous discussion. It says in the instructions, it says minimal clipping, which is very vague. I understand that. However, I will say this: on a image with that much range, and you do have highlight and shadow clipping potentials with that much range. There's in an image with that much range, I would argue that there should be some expected minimal clipping. If you've created an image without any clipping at all, you run the risk of not being in the ranges for other parts of the image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just gonna. Let me just check something real quick. So I'm clicking on the wrong stuff here.
Technical issues with photography. We don't know anything about that.
Yeah, no, it never happens.
Rick, what is your lighting method?
Using electronic flash, I have two Godox. I've got a AD200 and an AD300, and the the umbrellas, of course.
What do you think of the AD300 when it's paired with the AD200 in general? Is there enough power difference, or would you recommend going up to the 400?
I don't have a 400. I do have a 600, which is quite a bit more. The AD300 does not seem to be that much stronger than the 200, but I actually have them both set to approximately 1/8 power, and of course one is twice as far away from the others, and it's only a stop and a half down. So it's a little stronger. I didn't actually try swapping them. That'd be an interesting thing to try.
Right.
So I put the AD300 as my fill light because of the greater distance.
How long have you been using Godox?
Just about a year.
Okay.
Before that, I was using speed lights.
Right. I've heard that there's been some concerns with battery life on Godoxes, as far as not the number of flashes, but over the period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Rechargeable, number of times you can recharge. And I'm looking for people to be able to share opinions about that.
I've been using them for about 4 years now, and I'm not seeing a lot of problems with it. So maybe I'm lucky.
I've had 3 batteries go dead, and so it's not to do with the lifetime or the number of flashes. It can be related to how you charge them. So if you charge them up overnight, for instance, and then you leave them in, there's a discharge that happens. So sometimes the power goes out of the battery back into through the circuit. So it's not really protected well against that. And that's especially bad if you leave it plugged in but turned off, and now you get a drain. And if that battery is close to being discharged and you do that, you can lower it so that it goes below the threshold for recognizing the battery to charge it back up. So you've got a bricked battery. So it's not that the battery can't hold the charge, it's that the charging circuit won't let it charge up. So I always make sure now that when I charge them, I even have a timer so it charges a certain time period. And then I make sure I take the batteries out of the charger so they haven't got anything to discharge into.
So supporting John's comment there, it's like I always disconnect mine reasonably soon after all the lights are on. So I try not to overcharge it. Maybe that's why I'm having success there.
Yeah, I did the same thing with mine.
So it's also a safety issue because, I mean, a lithium battery, you can't put it out if it's on fire. So anything where you've left it plugged in and it gets hot, and there could be some issue that causes it, to burn. It's a slight risk. So it's a good thing to even be around when you're charging it, not leave it and go away.
Good information.
Well, and that's more for the, I've never had any problems with the AD200s, but I have AD600 and AD600 Pro, and they're different batteries. And the AD600, the first and less expensive one, that's the one where you can't kick it into charging. It's basically dead. But the AD600 Pro, if you ever get into that situation, that you can search online, there's a, you can take the lid off, and there's 2 pins, and you short it, and that kind of resets it, and then it will start charging up again. So you can kind of do a self-repair, which I've done a couple of times. So I didn't know what was going on, but now I just make sure I don't leave them in the charger after they're done, and I don't have problems after that.
That's good to know. Thank you.
And let me, with Rick's question, I actually have a, let me see if this is it. All right. Can you see that image right there?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
You see those blue dots?
Mm-hmm.
That was considered minimal clipping.
Okay.
Because this image passed. So even that looks like that was considered minimal. Now, one way that you can get around it is if you don't like seeing those blue dots underneath that clip. What could you do with that clip so you don't see that?
Well, the thing I was going to do today, had I not attended this, is I was going to turn the marker slightly.
Yep. That works just fine, because when you flip it over, you no longer have that problem with the shadows in that area.
Okay. So the clip does not have to be visible. It did not say it had to in the instructions.
Nope. All it says in the instructions is the cap must be removed and placed on the opposite end.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say if you ought to be able to see the clip or not.
Okay.
So that's one of those things we don't want to read into the instructions any. That's one thing that people have a problem with. And one thing I put in the chat is a link, whether you're a PPA member and logged in, or a non-member or not logged in, to the candidate handbook. The CPP candidate handbook has everything you need to know about the Sherman images. And let me pull mine up here. So you can see this right here, candidate handbook. And it's a free download. I'm going to go to here.
I don't think you're sharing your screen, Chuck.
Oh, well, that might be a little easier if I actually did that. Hold on. Let's. I know y'all are there. Oh, there we go. No, I want to share the screen. And okay. Yeah, but this has everything you need. It's got videos for the different lighting scenarios. It's got a link to the kit. It's got a setup guide. It's got whatever you need. Now, the biggest problem, I'm going to go here, technical evaluation quick guide. Order your technical image evaluation kit from BlickU, and it's got a link right in there. We click on that, and I went to BlickU. Did everybody else?
No.
You didn't see my screen going?
No, because it takes you to Chrome.
Not a
no, wait a
problem.
minute. You should be. Yeah, you may have to reshare your screen.
Yeah, I'm going to reshare. How about now?
Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can see this is it. And this is the important part. A lot of people miss this. This tells you the quantity required. You must put in the quantity that you're purchasing. You just can't leave it as it is. And the biggest problem is right down here when you get to the drawing paper. Flannel gray, single sheet. It requires 3. You must put a 3 in there. Also, you can't order your kit today and expect to do your images tomorrow or next week. You have to give them time.
Especially now that the post office is taking forever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they take. And also, what you see here, these are the preferred items that they want you to get from Blick. However, Blick frequently runs out of things. And so they have been authorized to do some alternates. And let me reshare and pull that up. No, I've got it here because I've seen it. This and it's not showing for some reason. I can't even see it. There's the screen. Here we go. All right, these are the supplies. This is the one that we have the biggest problem with. The paper that you put underneath Sherman and all his little toys. They prefer the flannel gray. That is what PPA prefers. However, if they don't have flannel gray, they can send you this darker steel gray. And if they don't have that, they can send you the even darker dark gray. So you may or may not get the same paper that's in the sample images. Also, they prefer the 4-inch balls. If they don't have them, they'll send you the 3-inch ones. You can still shoot Sherman with the 3-inch balls. It's not a problem. Also, this is one I haven't seen anybody have a problem with yet. They prefer the male Sherman. If they, for some reason, run out of that, they can send you his sister. And you use that for your images.
I bought one of each so I can pose them dancing.
Yes, you could do that. Although they probably wouldn't allow those for the evaluation. They might.
The chest is very slightly different, but not a lot. And in fact, in one of their sample images, I think it might be the female, not the male, because I got the male first, and I thought, oh, that's strange. It's slightly different for someone that's OCD about.
Yeah.
Precise.
So yeah, if you're trying to make everything match exactly to the sample images, good luck, because you probably have a different paper. You may have different size styrofoam balls. You may have a different Sharpie. They prefer the oval chisel tip. But if they're out of that, they'll just send you the round Super Sharpie. Either one is acceptable.
I noticed the sample images actually had the round Sharpie. I've got the oval one.
Yeah, they had the round Sharpie. And now let me get back to sharing. Here we go. This. So now once you've got everything set up, then we go to the biggest part, is the certification technical image evaluation checklist. This is what is used to evaluate your images. And there are 10 blocks that have to be checked off on this. If you can check off all 10 boxes on your image, there's no reason it shouldn't pass. But there's a few tricks in there. One, Says you the layout and composition. Mannequin is placed center of the composition, arms down, standing straight, set of 8 crayons out of the box. Here's a trick. If they don't have the 8 box of crayons, they can send you a 12-pack. You can't use all 12. You can only use 8, and it specifies that you must have a black crayon. They don't care what color the other crayons are, as long as you're using a black one. And that will come into clear focus in a little bit. And then they're on the left-hand side of Sherman, styrofoam ball. On the right, slightly in front of the mannequin, the black Sharpie. Here again, another hint. Cap removed and placed on the end of the marker in front of the styrofoam ball. Now here is where I've got clarification from Julia Boyd. It says this much match example images. It has to closely resemble these sample images. It does not have to be an exact duplicate, because, well, Rick, you already said you're not going to get an exact duplicate because you got the oval marker.
Mm-hmm.
Sample images have a round one, so you're not going to get it exact. But it needs to closely resemble as far as the angle that you're looking and all the other problems.
Question about that.
Yeah.
The instructions say that the mannequin has to be placed in the center of the composition. If you look at the version of the sample images that have the grid lines, you can see it's actually placed slightly to the left. Does it have to be the dead center? Because that doesn't match the sample images.
Yeah, not dead center. Matter of fact, let me pull up one of those with the grid lines. If I can. Yeah, I'm looking at the grid line now. Let me reshare this.
We see you.
Oh, you're seeing it now? Huh.
Yep.
Okay. Oops. Nope, don't want to do that. Yeah, so make this a little smaller. You can see, yeah, it's not perfectly in the center, but it's close. And that's the thing, and I did the same thing. I turned on the grid lines in my camera,
Mm-hmm.
and I lined it up just pretty much like this. And except, my Sherman was a little bit drunk, so he was leaning. So there's no way to keep him completely in the center. And as that's thing, it doesn't have to be an exact match, but it's got to be close. And that's another thing. I actually questioned Julie about it, because it tells you Sherman goes in the center. And then it says all kit items placed in the center. Well, now if we go back and we look at this, you'll see the kit isn't centered. I've got a lot more space on the left-hand side than I do the right-hand side.
And more on the top versus the bottom too.
Right, but all they're really concerned about is Sherman himself must be pretty much in the center. That's what they're looking at.
Okay.
And gray paper acts as a background. That's another thing. When you set up the gray paper, the ones in the rear must overlap the ones in front. And Jamie shows that in his video. And the reason for that is you need to be able to see the seams so that they can see you're using the 3 sheets of gray paper and not a 12-foot by 40-foot roll of neutral gray paper for studio. Because it's a whole lot easier to keep everything on the gray paper when you've got a huge piece of gray paper. Not as easy
Sure
with
is.
these 19 by 23 inch papers.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at a picture. No, we don't want that one anymore. Cancel that. Okay. Got these. Is everybody seeing my camera raw?
No,
No.
Not. Right. Let me
you have
go.
to unshare and then reshare probably.
Probably. Here.
Yep.
All right, now everybody's seeing it. And here's where we're going to go to the next part. And we're going to look at this one right here. It says all items are within frame, no item cropped from the images, all get unplayed. You look at that, it looks okay. Everything, they're centered. Got the gray paper, nothing cropped out. Anybody notice anything wrong other than Chris?
Yes.
What do you see?
It's supposed to be looking straight down on the head, and it's not.
Yeah, that is actually pretty close to what it is. Rebecca has her hand up. What do you see?
It should be landscape. Orientation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but you have to understand the very first thing they wanted everything in portrait. Then they changed it to make these landscape. Let me zoom in here. This is what caused this one to be a no-go.
Oh my gosh.
See that
Wow.
right there?
Yep.
That is the floor.
That is enough of the floor.
Yeah.
But that was my first submission, and that wasn't why those got kicked. Wasn't the only reason those got kicked back.
Right up, yeah. So let's look at how you measure it. All right, so we'll look at this one. There's no floor showing on this one. Okay, the straight on portrait orientation. White balance. Get rid of all these people here. White balance should be between 5,000 and 6,000. This one shows it at 5,800. So that's good. Now, submitted files should be properly exposed with minimal clipping of shadows or highlights. And then they have the acceptable range. You got the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. Now, where are we going to look for the highlights? Anybody want to take a guess? Where do you look for the highlights? Go ahead, Rick.
At the styrofoam ball.
Styrofoam ball, and that is exactly the information that Julia gave us. Is they're checking for highlights, the aspects of the styrofoam ball. So let me zoom in on that just a little bit, and we'll check. There's two ways to do this. One, as you hold your cursor, you'll see in the upper right hand corner, as you move it along, you'll see the red, green, and blue values changing. And it's actually hard to kind of watch those and move your thing. But we found out if you come over here and toggle the sampler, little eyedropper, and then as you click on places, they'll appear up at the top of the screen. Now, here depends on where I click on that ball. Where do I click? Do I click where I did 1 through 4? Or do I click where I hit 5, 6, and 7? Because 1, 2, 3, and 4, the range should be between 200 and 220 and 250. Do those meet the criteria? No, they don't. They're all too low. Now up at the 5, 6, 7, they're within the range. So where on that white ball are you going to click? That's the thing. You don't know where they're going to click, so I would make sure that you have as much of that white ball as possible within the range. Okay, now let's go. Now we go to the midtones. Where are we going to check the midtones? Anybody? Where are we going to check for the midtones at? Go ahead, Rick.
Well, two places I can think of. One is the gray paper, but since you just said that it's not necessarily going to be the same paper, I would say that's probably not the place. So in that case, I'd say the gray crayon, or excuse me, the black crayon with the gray paper.
Right, the gray paper, because there's 3 different shades, plus we're on the gray paper. We're going to click over here on the left-hand side, over here on the right-hand side. We wouldn't know where to click on the gray paper. But in the setup, they specified you must use a black crayon. So that's, and Julia has said they check midtones in the area of the crayons. So she said black crayon is a requirement. And that gray paper looks like it should work as a midtone. So let's click a few spots on there. And that should be between 195 and 230. Well, except for that last spot I clicked, which that last spot, if you look, let me zoom in, number 4, I've actually got that in the shadow area of the gray paper. So if I move it back to there, now we're in range. And we can click a couple more spots here. So the highlights on, or the midtones on this one look okay. The highlights were a little iffy depending on where they clicked. All right, now we're on to the shadow range, which should be 5 to 35. And where are we going to check on that? I'm going to guess right over here on this black cap, since that's where they told us. Well, they told us you must have the cap removed and placed on the opposite end. And so that's, and they also tell us, Julia has also said they're checking shadows in the area of the crayons, or in the, what is that thing? Sharpie.
Marker.
The marker, yes. We're looking at it, the area of the marker. And you look, there's a lot of blue dots, but they don't form a solid line.
Chuck, Deb has her hand raised.
Okay, Deb, what you got?
Hey, Chuck. This is really good. I'm trying to follow you. I just had a question. When you asked, and I assume that all of this is in the directions as to where they're telling us to check the highlights and the midtones and all of that. But if this, I guess I don't even know where, when you're saying, look at the numbers. I'm trying to see your screen. Are you looking up top when you're hitting those points, and then you're looking and it's measuring the highlights and the midtones?
Yeah, I'm clicking on spots for the shadows now. And up here at the top of my screen, where it says color sampler, it shows the RGB on those 6 spots I clicked.
Okay.
Are you able to make those out okay?
Yeah, I don't have my good glasses on today, but I kind of see it.
Yeah, and those are, that's the easiest way. Now, if I click on one of those blue dots, it goes below.
Okay.
Yeah, you see number 7 there, 211.
Okay.
That's below. And like I said, but it's not a solid line of blue under there. So that's something they're going to consider. They would consider probably minimal clipping. This one may be a little bit more than minimal, but it actually looks pretty much like the one I submitted as far as the amount of blue. Although, if you didn't like that, didn't like all those blue dots, what could you do?
Well, I heard what Rick said. Rick said that you would you would turn it. I don't know.
Hey,
Hey, Chuck, can I jump in here a little bit? Hey,
You
Deb.
just did.
Okay, I know, sorry about that. Okay, so, Chuck, turn off all those points if you could. See that box that Chuck just clicked?
Yes.
Okay, so when you only have one, can you show her how to check one, Chuck? Just one.
Just one spot.
Mm-hmm. And then look over on your histogram and it tells the numbers, right? Do you
Yeah, as
see
long
on-
as I keep
Okay.
Deb, do you see up on the thing, Deb, where
Yes.
it says, okay, so when we were doing this, what Chuck and I found out was instead of checking 1, we could check 10. Now go over here and click that box again and show Deb where you're clicking. And now, instead of just seeing it over on the histogram, you can see all 10 of these points up across the top. Do you see that?
Okay.
Does
Yes.
that make it easier for you to understand a little bit?
Okay, I see. Okay. I didn't know where you are. Okay, I didn't see that across the top.
I didn't think you did. Okay, so now
I was looking at the histogram.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now do you see how we're getting those numbers?
Yes.
Okay, good. Awesome. And
Yeah.
so when you can check 10 instead of checking 1, it makes it easier for you to understand it.
Okay.
Does that
Got
make
it.
sense?
Yes.
So
I
each
was
of-
looking in the wrong spot.
Right. Okay, there
No.
you go.
both spots are good, but when you look at the histogram, you have to keep your cursor very steady. And me, I'll put my cursor on a spot, and then when I look over, I have a tendency to move my hand.
Okay.
And so I want to keep it there. So by clicking on those spots,
Then you got it set.
it's set. Now,
Okay.
the one thing I forgot to do, and
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Chuck.
nobody called me on it, is I did not set the profile properly.
Oh, I should have called you on that, Chucky.
I know, I'm surprised. I just noticed it myself. All of these should be checked in Adobe Standard, not Adobe Color. Now, I want you to look at something. Well, just look at point number 9 up at the top. Adobe Color, Adobe Standard. See how that changed? And it changed on all of them. And if you look at your histogram, as soon as I do Standard, everything narrows in. The Adobe Color has a much larger gamut of colors that it chooses from, that it can display. But PPA decided they're going to go with the Adobe Standard profile. And as you can see, just looking at some of these, the difference between Standard and Color can make a difference. Because if you look at number 1, point number 1, 15.9, or in Adobe Color, 11.6.4, that is below. That's below the specifications. That spot says this won't pass. But when I change it to Adobe Standard, now it's 15.9.6. that would pass. And so you have to make sure, because we're using the same method when we do a preview of your images. You sign up to have a preview done. We're using the same standard the PPA is using. They've told us this list, that checklist, that is what they're checking it with. They're not using anything else. They're using that checklist. And all you have to do is get all of those images correct. I mean, so this one, except for we're not sure about the highlights.
Chuck, I have one other question.
Sure.
I ordered my stuff from BlickU, and on my descriptions, I do have three of the paper. Am I okay? That's what I need.
That's what you have to order. Like I said, when you go to it, it tells you it's required 3, and then the next box you have to fill in a 3 to get 3 pieces of paper. Yeah, if you never fill in those quantity ordered box, you ain't gonna get anything. You have to fill in those. They're all 1 except for the paper. The paper has to be 3.
Okay, so my quantities say 3 on the paper.
Right. It's got to be 3 on the paper. You just look and it'll tell you what's required, and you just put that same number in the next column for what you're ordering.
Got it. Okay.
And you should be good.
Okay.
So now we got that. Now the next thing they're looking for on this list is the direction of light. Main light should be on camera left of all images, and each image should show proper light direction and dimension. How do I know if my light is on the left, camera left? Yeah.
You said, how do you know?
How do I know if my main light is on camera left? How can I tell that by looking at this picture?
You see the highlights, right, on Sherman?
Yeah, kind of. What's a much easier way that jumps out and smacks you upside the head? That your main light is on the left.
For me, I see the light shining on Sherman. I see it on the ball. I see more shadows on the camera right.
That's it. That's the main thing. You look, that big shadow on the right-hand side.
Okay.
The only way it can be there is if my main light is over to the left. That's the only way. As far as seeing, you should be able to see some dimension on Sherman himself. But again,
okay, but the main thing is seeing that shadow. Okay.
Seeing that big shadow, that's a dead giveaway. Plus, you have to understand, if you're looking at Sherman himself, it depends on what tree they carved him out of. Some of the wood is a lot lighter than the others. I've seen, lighter Shermans, seen darker Shermans. I've seen Sherman with a lot of grain showing, some with almost no grain. And so you don't want to put a whole lot of emphasis on looking at what's happening on Sherman with the lighting.
Okay, got it.
Because the different color of the wood is going to make a difference. Okay, now, next part, sharpness. Each image will be checked for correct sharpness. Image 1. Acceptably sharp, background appearing softer as shown in the example images. And here we can see everything here is nice and sharp. I can see where it says Sharpie. I can see Crayola. And as I move further back, these seams start to get a little blurry. See that? So that gives me my sharpness. This one would be acceptably sharp. That is not the one where people have problems with the sharpness. Let's look over here at one of these next one. This is the minimum depth of focus. Minimum depth focus. Top point of the mannequin's head should be acceptably sharp and the rest fall off in sharpness. Let's zoom in on top of his head. Now, is the top of his head acceptably sharp? Looking kind of a judgment call on that. I would say yes, although his shoulders are sharper than the top of his head.
Yeah.
And then everything falls off as you go down. The main thing they want on this one, the minimum depth focus, is they want the top of his head to be really sharp. And then everything else can go to complete blur. They don't care. They want the top of his head to be sharp. Now, maximum depth of focus. Did I get it? Yeah. Here, everything must be acceptably sharp from top to bottom. Well, what I always tell people, let me see if I can pull it up here. No, wrong ones. I want to sample images without the grid lines. I may have to stop sharing for a second until I find it.
Be right back.
Share the screen again. Now this is the sample image. In fact, let me go to that. Now you see here on the minimum depth of focus, top of his head is super sharp and you can't make out anything below. That's what they're looking for there. This one here, everything, they say everything should be acceptably sharp. Now, top of his head, definitely sharp. It does fall off because you're using F16 and you can only get so far away. But now let's look at this image here.
Gotta stop and reshare.
I got to stop and reshare again.
Look kind of soft for the one with maximum depth of field.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I considered that pretty soft. Now let's look at this one of Chris's. Now to me, that's even sharper than the sample.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt. Top of the head, I can see the grain in the top of his head. I can read the crayons. I can read the Sharpie. It's, to me, it's much sharper than the sample. And what I've always told people is if your maximum depth of field is as sharp or sharper than the sample image, you should pass fine. If it's softer than the sample image, you need to redo it. But, you know, I can read this better than I can read the sample image. So to me, this is, if the sample image is considered acceptably sharp, this is definitely acceptably sharp. And that's what you have to look for.
Question.
Yeah.
To get the maximum depth of field, would it make, for the image with the maximum depth of field, would it make sense to focus on something below the head, like below the shoulders, basically a third in, as opposed to the top of the head, which would not be as sharp?
In my opinion, yes. Yeah. Because if you get a depth of field calculator, depth of focus calculator, there is no way, because Sherman's 12 inches high. So you want a depth of focus that's 12 inches at f/16, which you could easily do. You're not going to do it and keep it on the gray paper with a focal length between 70 and 105, because you're going to have to get about 5 feet above that paper, and you're going to have floor showing everywhere. So it's kind of a trade-off. And when I did it, and let me zoom in on this one because I'll be willing to bet Chris did it too. Yep. Now I can see the grain in the top of Sherman's head. There's no doubt. That's sharp. But I can see it a little bit better on his chest. So to me, right in this area on the chest is where it was focused at. But it's still, from his head to the crayon, still sharper than the sample image. And that's the important part.
So I did just pull out my depth of field calculator, and I used my Nikon D750 with a 85 millimeter lens, f/16, and you figured that Sherman's probably about 4 feet away from the film plane. The most depth of field you're going to get is 0.582 feet. So about 7 inches. Yeah. A little under 7 inches will be what my depth of field range or depth of focus range would be.
So I have a question. What's the difference between depth of focus and depth of field?
Spelling.
Yeah. Anybody else? Nobody?
Would it be the depth of focus would be the focus on the subject, and depth of field would be the area around?
Well, not quite. I thought you might have it on track there, but no. So depth of field you can think of as in the field. It's the region in front of the lens, on the subject side of the lens, that's in focus. Depth of focus is behind the lens, and it's what the lens focuses on to the film or the sensor. So they're often used interchangeably, but actually they're really not quite the same thing. I'll put the definition in the chat.
Never knew that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, and now the final thing on which we've ignored on all these so far, is the metadata. And they're looking for 2 things. Well, 3 things. The f-stop. For the straight-on picture, the f-stop must be at f13, which that we can see in camera raw. And minimum depth of field must be f6. Maximum f16. The focal length must be between 70 and 105. Now, all 3 of these are at 85 millimeters, so they're all within the range. And the date created must be within 90 days of submission. And that's, you know, you have to make sure that whatever the date and time on your camera must be correct.
Hey, Chuck, I had someone ask me a question earlier this morning. Do all the images have to be created on the same day? Anybody want to answer that?
No, they do not.
All it says is date created should timestamp within 90 days of submission. It nowhere in there on the checklist does it say everything has to be done the same day. It doesn't even say they all have to be at the same focal length. As long as each one is between 70 and 105, and each one was taken within 90 days of submission. Because you may
Chuck,
take a bunch of pictures over a 3 or 4 day period and then go through and pick out the ones you think will pass.
Right.
And they could be taken on different days at different focal lengths.
Right. Just to clarify something that you kind of said but didn't say it fully, date created cannot be viewed in Adobe Camera Raw. It has to be viewed in and what they're using is Adobe. What is it?
Bridge.
Adobe Bridge, right? Because I use Adobe Lightroom, so.
Yeah, let me.
I have to step away for a minute. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Yeah, now here, let me share again. Now here, move all this out of my way. Now we're looking at these in Bridge. We look at one at a time.
Hey, okay, yeah. Show them where you can show the date. But also, if you can go back to that original view at one point. So, one thing I wanted to point out in these, and it unfortunately these didn't pass because of exposure problems. But the one thing that they do is the exposures match between the three images, and that is something that you will want to use in one of your viewers. You want to make sure that you look across the board, do all three of my images match?
Yeah, and here I'm showing him here. You can see all three over here, and you know the exposure looks pretty good on all of them as far as being equal. The far one on this one over here on the right is a little bit brighter than the other two. But now,
Are you doing that just by? Are you doing that just by your eye?
Yes.
Making sure.
Yeah.
Now here, I'm in Bridge, and I've clicked on the Essentials tab. And here I can see the date created, all that. I can see the bit depth. I can see who created it. That's if you have it set in your camera to say who you are.
And Chuck, if you click on the down arrow to the right of Essentials, you'll see metadata.
Yeah.
And then the second column is the date created.
And then, you know, then we can see that here. We can see the metadata, and it tells me this is where they're going to check to see if it was done within 90 days. They're going to look over here, date created, 2/9/2019. Right, we're good within 20 days, within 90 days. Well, from when it was submitted, not for now. Wouldn't work for now.
Yeah.
But that tells you, and this is where they're looking at all that. Again, as long as you can check off all 10 boxes of this checklist, your images should pass. But it's got to be all 10. Now, if an image fails, you submit 3 images, one of them fails, what do you have to do the next submission period?
Just pass that, make sure you pass that one that failed.
Yes, only the one that failed has to be resubmitted.
But its exposure has to be consistent with the other 2.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they will tell you basically why it didn't. You know, composition was wrong, underexposed, overexposed, floor space showing. You know, so they'll tell you basic. They're not going to get into detail and tell you your exposure was wrong because your midtone was below 195. They're not going to tell you that. They're just going to tell you your image was underexposed.
I'm not even sure they tell you whether it's under or overexposed, do they?
Yeah, I remember they told me on mine, my first submission, all 3 were underexposed. Yeah, I had to do it twice too.
So Chuck, I know what the hardest part of the written exam is. What is the hardest part of the image submission?
Keeping my cat from playing with the ball.
And not setting your whole setup on fire before you've actually passed. that is very difficult.
I can kind of answer that. Because I've seen a lot of people try. I think that the number one thing that is the hardest for people is they overthink it.
Yes.
And so if
Sally, you know me too well.
So if you overthink stuff and you start going, is it exactly this millimeter? I've got to make it exactly this. If you can go through that checklist and you can check everything off on that checklist, you're going to pass. So if you can't do the checklist, we've had people that said, well, I can't set the time right in my camera. You will fail if you can't set the camera right and the time right in your camera. I'm sorry to tell you that, but you need to know how to set your camera and do that. So look at the checklist, don't overthink it. Don't try to make it more complicated than it is. And it's pretty simple, actually, when you do exactly what's on the checklist. I think the thing that was hard for all of us in the beginning, a year and a half, 2 years ago, is we didn't really understand the checklist. And
and we didn't have all the information on our checklist.
Right.
That's true.
We only had 9 items on our checklist.
We've worked hard to really make it better.
Yeah, I'm trying to find somewhere here. I'll find it eventually, maybe. I actually have a list of why images have failed. This is it. Okay, here it is. Main reason in 2019 and 2020, we don't have it for 2021 yet. Main reason for failing. Number 1.
You're not sharing, Chuck.
What's that? I'm not
Were
sharing.
you trying to share?
No, I'm just telling you. Number 1 is underexposed highlight and midtone ranges. Those were the number 1 reasons for 2 years running why images failed. Number 2 reason for 2 years running, focal length. It has to be between 70 and 105, or equivalent if you're using a crop sensor. They did add that in there. It must be, if you're using a crop sensor, it has to be equivalent. That's the number 2 reason. Number 3 for 2019 was white balance. It has to be between 5,000 and 6,000. when you're looking at it in Adobe Camera Raw, not what your camera says. Because we've learned this is a problem with Nikon cameras and Adobe. There's a disconnect between them. You might set your Nikon camera for 5500. When it pops up in Adobe, it's going to show your white balance is at 62. It's going to fail. Even though your camera said it was right, Adobe Camera Raw says it's too high, it's going to fail.
Yeah, that problem may actually extend beyond just Nikon too, because your white balance temperature is not part of the metadata. It is calculated by Adobe Camera Raw based on the picture content. So I know Nikon is especially aberrant, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all other brands are out from underneath that issue, because it is not part of the metadata. That's my other point.
Right. And so you set it in your camera, you take a picture, and you see what Adobe Camera Raw says your white balance is. If it says your white balance is out of range, you adjust it in your camera until it is within range. I don't care if your camera says your white balance is 4,900. If it comes up between 5,000 and 6,000 in Adobe Camera Raw, that's what they're looking for.
Which is also the exact reason why I highly recommend before you even start, the very first thing you do is take your camera back to factory presets. Because it's very possible, like I did, I had some presets changed in there, some custom functions and whatnot that way that I wouldn't have thought about. And also, take your filter off of your lens.
Yeah.
That will change the color of your photos, and they won't look right.
Don't want any type of filter on your lens. And the last thing that they had problems with was the composition. And in 2019, they specified the main reason it failed is people would remove the cap from the marker and toss it to the side instead of putting it on the other end. You know, that cap must be on there, or, you know, they've gone, composition can also be going off the paper, cropping things out, having the back wall showing instead of paper. I've actually had people submit something like that. They got down so their camera was right looking directly at Sherman, and their background was whatever wall they had back there. So, but those are the main reasons. Underexposed highlights and midtones, wrong focal length, white balance being off, and the composition. Those are the main reason people fail. And like Sally said, they fail them because they overthink things. Don't overthink it. This, you know, like this is laid out pretty well. Follow it. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it.
That's what the Bible say.
Don't add to, don't take away. You know, people will look at it, and if they find one spot, one little spot that is out of range on the highlights, they figure the whole thing is wrong. Well, look at numerous spots. You got to have an average. And, you know, but yeah, like I said, the main thing, people overthink it. Is that, and we have a group here who will happily go through and check your images before you submit them. We have a Sherman image preview that we've set up.
And thanks to Chuck for that. Chuck and Guy T. And actually, I have 2 appointments today with Mia. We have 2 candidates to test the images today, and another on Thursday.
Yeah, when you're ready to submit, all you have to do is hold on. Let me find that link, and I will put that link in the chat if anybody needs it. If I can find it. All I just put it in there. That link I just put in will take everybody who wants to use it to the scheduling calendar. Because that calendar is open now, because image submission, there's 5 image submissions a year. They're always on an even numbered month, except for December. And it's always the very first 2 weeks, from Friday noon Eastern to Friday noon Eastern 2 weeks later. That is when the submission period is. It opens on a Friday at noon, it closes on a Friday at noon. Once it closes, you will have the absolute longest 3 weeks of your life. Because they spend the first 2 weeks after it closes, they do not evaluate any images until the submission window closes. They spend 2 weeks evaluating the images. The third week, they compile who won, who didn't. And they will put those all in. And then usually the Wednesday or Thursday of that third week, after submission window has closed, they will send out emails to everybody as to whether you passed or failed.
You get to know the Jeopardy song by heart.
Yes. And so if you submit it this Friday at 12:01, you have a 5-week wait to find out. It is a very, very long 5 weeks.
Hey, Chuck, can I ask you a question?
Sure. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make something up.
Well, I want to make sure, I want to clarify something I think I heard you say. When we're taking our samples of where the exposures are supposed to be, whether it's highlights, shadows, or midtones, did you say that they evaluate those by averaging?
Well, they don't look at one specific spot. They look at different spots. Well, I've had people who
have you verified that information?
Yes, they do check in multiple locations in like the ball, the crayon. They don't just click a spot and say, "Oh, that's it."
Okay, all right.
They do check it in the area, not just any specific spot.
Okay.
And we've had people who they'll see a red dot on that styrofoam ball.
Oh, you got clipping.
And they will like, that's going to fail. That red dot is over 250. Well, yeah, that red dot is over 250. So the easiest way is don't click on it. Don't click on the red dot. Don't click on the blue dots. Look at that area overall. Because I guarantee you, if you zoom in enough, you will find a spot where it will fail.
Yep.
And if you try and get it to where there will be no spots at all that fail, you will make a career of shooting Sherman. It will become your career. You will not be doing any other type of work. You'll just be shooting Sherman.
Okay, I got to go. Thanks so much, Chuck. Nice to see everyone. Good luck.
Thanks, John.
The images in soon. Bye now.
Bye, John.
Thank you.
So it's really not a difficult process. It is time consuming, and it's not easy. Some people will tell you, you buy a camera, you order the kit, and poof, you're magically going to be a CPP. That is generally said by people who have never tried to shoot the Sherman images. Because I guarantee you, my hair was dark when I started. But it's doable. I did it. Not sure if Sally has gotten hers yet, but no. She helped me with my first set, and that's when we found out they
Yeah,
didn't.
we didn't know what we were doing.
They didn't give us all the information. They didn't tell us the first submission period that they were looking for specific RGB values in highlights, midtones, and shadows. All they said is it's got to be properly exposed. Okay. So we look, what's proper exposure? Well, you can see detail in the highlights, you can see detail in the shadows. We both looked at mine. We saw detail in the highlights, we saw detail in the shadows, we submitted them. And 3 weeks later, they said, congratulations, all 3 of yours failed. Because they're underexposed. Oh yeah, that's another thing. When you get that email, you have to open it. The subject line in that email is the same whether you pass or fail. So you have to open the email to find out. There's no peeking at the subject line going, yes. You have to open it.
Very good, Chuck. I appreciate your all your help here today. It's been a great conversation. Hoping that we've answered some questions for candidates. That's good. That's good.
Hopefully.
Yep.
As usual, we're in overtime. Yay.
That's right. Yeah, we are.
Corey Benjamin was trying to get on all this time, but he didn't get on. Is this recorded? Where can he find it?
Yes, this is being recorded. I'm going to go ahead and pull it off and get it, trim off the beginning part as we usually do, and then I'll put it up on, there'll be a Facebook post that goes out that has a hyperlink that will take you directly to it.
Okay, I'll send it.
I got on.
He got on, Sally.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, I see him.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm here.
I don't see him. I see him.
How long have you been on, Corey?
I've been on. I got in like 15 minutes late, but I got on.
Okay, good. Okay.
So I saw all the sermons. I saw all the stuff that confused me about the points and all that other good stuff. But I've been on for a while.
Okay, good.
Thank you for checking on me, though.
Like I said, once you guys are ready to submit images, just follow that link to our scheduling calendar, and you can schedule somebody, right now there's 5 primary people who will review your images and a bunch of secondary people.
I think one thing that we didn't bring up that trips some people up too, I wouldn't say it's a huge percentage, make sure when you're submitting your images, you are submitting them in the right place on the portal, wherever because they tell you this is going to be this is where you submit your max depth of field. This is where you submit your minimum depth of field. If you get those two reversed, that'll cause you to fail.
Yep.
They want to make sure you know in the terms.
And when you get ready to submit them, you are allowed to rename your images to whatever you choose to rename them. I renamed mine with my PPA member number and which image it was, straight on, minimum depth of field, maximum depth of field.
That's a good idea.
Because I wanted them, when they saw it, I wanted them to know whose image it was and which one it was. And I verified with Julia, you do not have to keep the camera name. You can change it to whatever you want.
This was good. Thank you, Chuck.
You probably shouldn't name it PPA ripoff. I wouldn't do that. All right. Any other questions?
Good deal, guys. Good discussion today.
Very
All right.
helpful.
We
Thank
shall
you,
see
Chuck.
everybody,
See everybody next week, right?
except for me. I probably won't be here next week.
All right. Well, you're excused.
I have an appointment.
All righty. All righty, guys. You take care.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you very much.